Hello Exile! You asked and I delivered. Following on from my Chaos Trial video, I decided to run 50 Trials of Sekhema to see if running these trials are worth your valuable time. Even though I tried to keep this as short as possible, this video is slightly longer due to just how much depth these trials have, so grab a cup of coffee, sit back and enjoy. Let us begin. The Trials of Sekhema are one of the Ascendancy trials in Path of Exile 2, and compared to the Chaos trials, they can take a whole lot longer to do, but I'm sure we all know that by now. Unlike the Chaos trials, we can walk straight in and kill the pinnacle boss Zarokh without having to insert a single fragment, which, depending on how you look at it, actually makes them shorter in a way, but at face value, they are inherently longer in terms of runtime. So this begs the golden question. Why would we put ourselves through yet another round of madness for close to 19 hours? The answer, my good Exile, is Shrimple, the Last Flame. For those of you who don't know what this is, the Last Flame Relic enables Zarokh to drop the Temporalis unique chest, which is currently one of, if not the biggest chase unique in PoE 2 at the moment, and sells for around 420 divines at the time of recording. Now, before you start sharpening your pitchforks and lighting the torches to tell me that you need hundreds of runs to drop this thing or that it is a myth, which might be true in some cases, along the way there are a fleet of other options to make currency in the Trials of Sekhema. So much so that this may now be my preferred currency making strategy going forward in future leagues to come. That is, until something juicier pops up. So, what else makes us money while we hunt for the Last Flame? The first and the most obvious would be the relics that drop along the way. Using the relic setup that we will talk about shortly, these drop like hotcakes and you will very quickly fill up your dump tabs in a few runs. Some of these can sell for a healthy amount of divines. The relics that we are looking out for are specifically urn relics, seal relics and amphoras. Maybe tapestry, but other than that we can ignore incense relics, except for the Last Flame of course, vase and coffer relics. I would also highly recommend you set up your filter to highlight these for ease of access as you do your runs. Aside from the general relics that we find during our runs, Zarokh will also drop other unique relics aside from the Last Flame. The one that we care the most about is the Desperate Alliance Vase relic. These allow people to farm the Against the Darkness jewel and currently sell for around 3 divines per, and will drop more consistently than the Last Flame. The other relics that he drops genuinely aren't worth mentioning as it is so late into early access, and the princely sum of 1 exalt per relic is just not worth the muscle power to pick them up. Relics aside, Sekhema is also a great way to farm jewels in bulk, and you will very quickly rack up tabs full of jewels that you can either craft on or sell as is. Throughout my runs, I got a few very delicious jewels that we will take a look at in a bit. So all in all, the true money makers for our runs are the relics we pick up and the jewels we can farm. Before we move on, after you kill Zarokh, you will be greeted with a room that is packed to the brim with chests. These are opened with keys that you acquire throughout the trial. The chests I would prioritize to get the most out of these rooms are as follows. Halt! Before we continue, if you've watched my previous videos or just find my content helpful and enjoyable, could I encourage you to hit like and subscribe? We are so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers and it would mean the world to me if we could reach that goal so I can keep feeding my stash tab addiction as well as keep making content for you all. Thank you so much. Back to the video. Now let's go over the build that I used as well as the relic strategy for these runs. This is important as it will drastically influence your experience within these trials. Your run speed will be very heavily influenced by how fast your build is. This is a given. Currently, a Temporalis or a Queen of the Forest build will be able to do these runs the fastest. The build that I chose to use is a Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder that was inspired by PoE Flow. He did an awesome video on how to build this thing, but let's briefly go over why we are running with this and what changes were made to make it even more viable. If you want to watch how to build the skeleton of the whole thing, I will leave a link to his video in the description. In the original version, the build did not use Queen of the Forest. With a few simple changes, we implemented Queen of the Forest and stacked as much evasion rating as possible to give us as much inherent movement speed as possible. Faster movement speed means faster runs, which means less sanity lost in the process. With these changes, my runtime went down from a 35-minute average to a 22-minute average across all 50 runs. Through the magic of relic stacking and some good boons within the trial, we can stack bonus defenses when inside the trial to give us up to 200% or more movement speed, depending on how you choose to build your character of course. So, why Poisonous Concoction? Well, it's funny you should ask. Running this build negates a lot of the negative afflictions inside the trial that would normally brick a lot of other builds. Don't worry, we will go over which ones to look out for and which ones to avoid in a bit. It's not the be-all end-all build for Sekhema trial running, but it sure does make things smooth. I also want to mention that I have over 100% increased rarity. While this doesn't affect the drops from Zarokh or chests, it does help with general monster drops. To be clear though, it is not necessary to have this, it is just a nice to have. One more thing before we get into the relic setup. This has been mentioned a lot before, but if you really want to have the best experience when running these, you absolutely need to find a way to slot Blink and Frostwall into your build. Using this combo will enable you to skip the gauntlet rooms within seconds, drastically speeding up your runtime. I found that using any random wand coupled with the Crest of the Ardura unique shield in my weapon swap helped a ton with cooldown recovery, as well as using Ingenuity and Second Wind to support Blink. So now that we have the build out of the way, let's dive into the relic setup for these runs. The strategy I used was a simple relic hunting strategy. In essence, our aim was to stack as much quantity of relics dropped as well as increased defenses for more evasion. This part of the setup can get a little expensive. Some of these relics can set you back up to 8 divines or more per relic, so my best advice is to either start small if you can't afford it, or to buy a lower roll and re-roll them with divines like I did. For me, it worked out cheaper that way. At least this is a once-off expense, so you don't have to keep buying these like the fragments used for Chaos Trials. For this strategy, you will need 2 amphoras, 2 urns, and 4 seal relics. Here is the configuration if you want to know how to set them up correctly. Let's start with the amphoras. We are looking for Merchant has 2 additional choices. 3 would be better, but that can get a little expensive. We also want enough honor resistance on both of them to at least take us to the honor resistance cap of 75%. With both of the amphora relics, merchants will have between 4 to 6 additional choices depending on the relics that you've acquired, which will help us get the boons that we need much quicker than usual. With our honor resistance sorted, let's look at the urn and the seal relics. On all of these, we are looking for only 2 modifiers: increased quantity of relics dropped by monsters and increased defenses. The most important one here is the increased quantity of relics dropped, as this forms the entire foundation of the strategy. We want as close to 20% as possible on all of our seal and urn relics. A perfect 20% on all of them would take us to 120% increased quantity of relics dropped, which would be further boosted to just over 150% with the enchanted urn boon that we will get inside the trial. This massive percentage increase helps Zarokh drop way more unique relics, which, you guessed it, increases the chances to drop a Last Flame. The other modifier, increased defenses, helps us stack more evasion, which grants us more movement speed due to the Queen of the Forest. So all in all, we kind of want as high a roll on these 2 modifiers as possible for the best experience. Alrighty, now that we have our relic setup covered and potentially the build used, let's quickly dive into the general strategy that we use inside the trials. Flaws 1 and 2 are about prioritizing as much sacred water as possible while grabbing as many merchants as we can to get the boons that we need quickly. Try your best to avoid as many afflictions as you can while doing so. Obviously, some builds can handle some afflictions that others can't. So in terms of afflictions that are absolute no-nos for this build, the ones that we need to avoid are: Iron Manacles means no evasion. No evasion means no movement speed, and you can see how that's going to go. Forgotten Traditions, this one is a hard no. It will completely disrupt the entire foundation of the strategy. Deceptive Mirror, if you ever want to randomly wind up in a room that gives you Iron Manacles or worse, then take this one. It's not as harmless as it appears, so be careful. Costly Aid, this one is in the same vein as Myriad Afflictions, proceed with caution. And lastly, Purple Smoke, this one can completely up your run because you will have no idea what you are pathing into. Afflictions like Hungry Fangs can be worked around in my opinion. Running an evasion build means that you will very rarely get hit by monsters in the trial, so it isn't too bad. Where it might screw you over is when you fight Zarokh. His little lightning attack will quickly strip your health away if you do get hit. If you have enough damage to burst him down, it ain't so bad, but proceed with caution. Any of the other ones you can take as you see fit. Obviously, use some common sense and suss out if your build can handle the other afflictions as you go along. Now, for the boons that we absolutely need to get. For this strategy, there are really only 3 necessary boons for this to function. Enchanted Urn for a 30% increased effect to our non-unique relics. This one is important. Flooding Rivers for 50% more sacred water found, and Lustrous Lacquer for 50% increased defenses, which increases our movement speed by quite a substantial amount. The rest of the boons along the way are bonuses, and you can stack them up as you go. Secondary to the core 3, I'd suggest Ornate Dagger for increased attack damage and Sanguine Vial for less monster life. These two will offset a few of the afflictions that you will probably pick up during your runs. Other than that, knock yourself out and shop to your heart's content. Alrighty, it's loot time. It's time to figure out just how profitable these runs are. Starting off with the random currency that we found during the trials. As always, I made sure to convert the currencies that made sense at the time. The smaller currencies like Vol Orbs, etc. just don't make any sense to convert them because they are worth so little this far into early access. I gathered a total of 262 raw exalts for my runs, definitely way more than the Chaos Trials. 39 Orbs of Chaos sold for between 17 to 18 exalts at the time, netting us 688 exalts profit. 2 Orbs of Annulment gave us a pretty substantial 96 exalts profit, not too bad. I also got 4 raw divine drops from the trials, and finally, 10 Orbs of Chance netted us 80 exalts in profit. So in total we got 2,746 exalts, or roughly 6.7 divines in profit at the time of recording. With the random currency out of the way, let's move on to the true meat of our rewards, the loot that we gathered throughout the trials. Remember what I said before about the relics dropping like hotcakes throughout the trials? Yeah, I wasn't joking. Throughout the runs, I had to clear more quad dump tabs of relics than I could count. A quick reminder, you can reforge your relics, so while you are doing these runs, be sure to reforge the useless ones as you go. When it comes to the high value relics, this late in early access, everyone already has all the basic ones and are currently looking to min-max their current relic setups. So I decided that it was not worth it to sell the relics that only sell for exalts, but rather look at close to max raw relics that will sell for divines only. After all of that clearing out, this is what we're left with. So let's start with the Desperate Alliance relics that we got from Daddy Zarokh. We got 21 Desperate Alliance relics, which at 3 divines per at the time, net us 63 divines once they all sell. Now, moving on to this cluster over here. These are the relics that I cherry-picked that I found will sell quite well. Some of the more notable ones are this bad boy, which sells for a conservative 15 divines, this one for about 8 divines, this one for about 4 divines, and then this one for about 5 divines. Those are some of the more notable ones, but I calculated this whole cluster will roughly sell for a conservative 69 divines, which is a perfect number as far as I'm concerned. Alrighty, the relics are done. Time for the jewels. As you can see, I have 3 stash tabs which have quite a few jewels in them. I went through briefly to cherry pick a few that stood out, but for the most part I haven't crafted or gone through them properly yet. Otherwise, we will be here for a lot longer than we need to be. However, let's take a look at the juicy ones we picked out. Starting off with this delicious Time Lost Sapphire right here. Technically, this one will be a best in slot for the kind of build that I'm running, and currently nothing exists on the market with these rolls. I'm undecided on whether I should sell it or use it, but I would estimate its value at around 25 divines or more, but this is to be confirmed. Next up is the Sapphire. This is an absolute beast for spell builds, of which I would estimate it being sold for at least a conservative 20 divines, if not more. I got exactly 1 of each Spectrum jewel and then just never saw a Spectrum chest again. The most notable one being the Sapphire, which sells for 6 divines, followed by the Emerald for 1 divine. The Ruby is not much to write home about, so it's not even worth selling. Lastly, my pride and joy of the jewels that we found, this baby right here. If we manage to roll this to max rolls, she will sell for roughly 90 divines as is. If we were to corrupt it, that number goes closer to 180 divines. I mean, I could sell it as is, but there's one phrase that echoes throughout my mind. Something that I know all of you are chanting behind the screens right now. Vol or no balls. So that's exactly what we're going to do. First, let's roll this with some divines to get the max quiver bonus. And it took us 10 divines to get there, not too bad. Now, for the corrupt. Well, I wouldn't have expected anything else. At least after that letdown, I have one more pride and joy that I want to share with you, something that I purposefully kept towards the end. Remember the elusive Last Flame? Well, I managed to drop one in run number 8. Of course, this is not common at all, and some people may never see a Last Flame. I managed to sell it at the time for 410 divines. Before we get to the total profit, let's go through what I had to spend to do these. These expenses were entirely my choice and are not necessary to do, so depending on how you approach things, your profit may be significantly higher than mine. I spent a total of 55 divines, which included rolling the relics that I already had to min-max them, as well as rolling the jewel that we just bricked. With that out the way, time for the profit. I will split the profit into 3 sections, the first being the total income without including the jewels and only factoring in the Desperate Alliance relics so we can see what our income would be with as little RNG influence as possible. The total profit from random currency added up to 6.7 divines. Selling just the Desperate Alliance relics will give us 63 divines, which would make our total income 69.7 divines. If we subtract the 55 divines voluntary expense that I did, we are left with 14.7 divines profit, which would make our hourly profit 0.80 divines based on a 22-minute average run. Now to add in the relics and jewels that we got from the runs. The total profit from random currency added up to 6.7 divines. Once all the relics sell, we are looking at roughly 132 divines. And if I chose to sell the jewels that I mentioned, we will be looking at a conservative 50 divines for them, minus the bricked one, of course. In total, that leaves us with 188.7 divines. Taking away the 55 divines that we spent, that would give us 133.7 divines profit. Because my average runtime was 22 minutes, that would bring our total profit per hour to 7.29 divines. Finally, our profit if we included the Last Flame. Bear in mind that this is not realistic for many people, but it's nice to see the numbers nonetheless. Adding the 188.7 divines from the jewels, relics, and random currency to the 410 divines from the Last Flame gives us a whopping 598.7 divines. Taking away the 55 divines expenses, we are left with a total of 543.7 divines, which works out to 29.6 divines per hour for our time. Again, bear in mind that your numbers will differ from mine based on the current economy and of course RNG. Compared to the Trials of Chaos, which has a more consistent income in terms of soul cores and fragments dropped, the Sekhema trial will be a win big kind of situation. You stand a much higher chance of dropping something extremely valuable, but again, this is heavily influenced by RNG. One thing I can say is, even though it is longer, it is significantly less boring than the Trials of Chaos. You will have a choice on how you want to do the runs, and each run is different, which helps with fatigue. So this leads us to the question of which is better. Honestly, that comes down to you. Personally, I enjoy Sekhema more because of the variety, but Chaos Trials makes for a great early game currency farm because it's reliable. You will at least walk out there with something each run, whereas in Sekhema you can walk out with nothing worthwhile. At the end of the day, run what you enjoy, but personally, I'll be running these to get currency in the leagues to come. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd encourage you once again to drop a like and consider subscribing. If there's anything else you want to see, pop your ideas in the comments below. Until next time, stay sane, Exile.